Hopefully stay on our time. Today we are also honored to have some additional members of the task force here, and so just for the purposes of making sure that everyone is aware of who's at the table, we're going to pause at this moment and just have a round table of introductions. And so why don't we start with Mrs. Riley?
Good morning, I'm Kelly Riley. I'm the Executive Director of the Mississippi Professional Educators.
Robin Killebrew, Principal, Pass Christian High School.
George Helmet, President of the Mississippi Association of
Howard Savage, Principal, Putnam High School.
Stephen Hampton, Director of Accountability for Lamar County Schools.
Amy Carter, Superintendent of Meridian Public Schools.
And I'm Benita Coleman. I'm the Superintendent of Ocean Springs School District.
Cantor, Executive Director of Mississippi First, and apparently we have some folks joining us on the live stream, so MDE asked that we all speak into the mics so that everybody on the live stream can hear us as well.
Tim Martin, Superintendent of Clinton Schools.
Icy Cockerham, high school student of Hamilton High School. My name is Sadie Smith, and I'm a senior at Ocean Springs High School.
Robert Sanders, Assistant Superintendent of Simpson County School District.
Buddy Bailey, Assistant Superintendent, Rankin County School District and State Board of Education.
Eddie Passant, Superintendent of the Starkville October High School District.
James Pruitt, Senior at Meridian High School.
Ellen Patrick. Ellen Patrick, Senior at Mississippi School for the Blind.
Good morning, Jessica Brown, Principal, Pearl Junior High. Good morning, Laura Evans, parent from Greenwood Public School District in Greenwood, Mississippi. Good morning, Jennifer Wilson, Superintendent, Greenwood Public Schools.
Anyone else online? Thank you to our colleagues that are also joining us via the live stream as well. Just as a reminder, we have, and Mrs. Cormack, Crystal Cormack, who is also the chair of the Mississippi Charter Authorizer Board, has joined us as well. Just as a reminder, the mission and vision of the Mississippi Department of Education are listed. And of course, Dr. Wright in her absence always wants us to be aware of those and how our work actually feeds into making sure that we're providing leadership that not only promotes sound policy, but also sound accountability systems and adds to how well our students are able to compete in the global community. In terms of the strategic goals of the department, all 6 of those are listed. And of course, we're dealing a lot today with Goal 2 as well as Goal 1, as well as Goal 6. Making sure that all schools and districts are rated a C or higher, but also more importantly, that all students graduate from our high schools, college, and or career ready. The goals of this task force, there are 3 of them, and I'm not going to read those to you, but I would like to draw your attention to the document you have in your packet from June 19, 2018. At that time, these were also some additional questions that this committee brought forth. We have listed for you in parentheses and in color also how some of those will be addressed, and you'll hear about the survey task force, subtask force today, and how they plan on addressing those testing task force questions that deal with the survey as well. And so we're going to, at this time, move to, we'll talk about reminders at the end of the meeting in terms of our next meeting date. We're going to move to a report out from our survey subcommittee meeting that was held in the month of July. And at this point, I will yield the mic to Rachel Cantor.
Good morning, everyone who is joining us from live stream. If at any point you can't hear me, please ask me to speak more directly into the microphone. But we did have a meeting in July of the survey subcommittee. It was a very productive meeting. We went through a draft of the survey and made several decisions. I'm going to go through 2 documents that represent the most updated version of part 1 of the survey. So one of the crucial decisions that the survey subcommittee made was to split the survey into 3 mini surveys and to target those 3 mini surveys to the most appropriate audience. So the burden of filling out the survey would not fall on a single individual in a district, but would be dispersed across people who were most likely to be able to have those answers. So there, as you see in both documents, there's one that's just called Statewide Testing Survey Part 1 and one called Statewide Testing Survey Part 1 Survey Preparation. On either of the documents, you see 3 bullet points. Where it says Part 1 about district tests, Part 2 about district and state testing practices, and Part 3 about technology. So those are the 3 mini surveys that will be sent out. The first one is the survey about district tests, and this is the survey that's trying to capture information about tests that districts choose to take for their own internal purposes, and that there is no other way for us to get the information other than a survey directly to the districts, because this information is not collected by any current agency, and it varies very widely across districts. Most of the questions that you see on this Testing Task Force June 19, 2018 are answered through the through this first part of the survey, which asks about district tests. But some of the questions are going to be in the other parts. Now, the district, we talked through who the first part of the district survey should go to. We determined it should go to some sort of district official, and that we should give them at least 4 weeks to be able to turn the survey around. Another thing that the survey subcommittee talked through was making sure that all the survey questions were multiple choice, drop down, checkbox, or in some way that the answers were clear and standardized, so that we wouldn't have to, after the survey was administered, go back and try to code long narrative answers. And it's much harder to answer a survey that requires long narrative answers than if it requires multiple choice. So that took a considerable amount of time to make sure that every question was very specific and that it could be answered in a drop-down multiple choice type of question. That is what is represented in the Statewide Testing Survey Part 1 document. This document actually goes through every question, and then what all the answer choices will be for those questions, and then what type of question it is. So if you just want to flip through it briefly, you'll see that there are some things that are highlighted in yellow. Those are actually instructions to the person programming the survey about how to program the survey. But you see that one of the reasons this document is so long is because with multiple choice answers, you have to list out all of the answers, all the multiple choice answers. So essentially, the only questions where there will be open-ended responses are if there is an other that is needed for the district to accurately answer the question that could not be, pre-considered through a multiple choice. I was able to go back and forth with Christy, and I think Christy is on the phone, about the survey. Christy, are you there?
Yes, I am here, Rachel.
Yeah. So we went back and forth trying to make sure that the questions were clear and that there were clear multiple choice answers for every question. One of the, obstacles we've run into is that once this was done, which was at the beginning of August, the survey client for the Department of Education, meaning the platform for the survey, MDE has a relatively unsophisticated survey client. And in order to make this survey as user-friendly as possible, the more sophisticated the survey client is, the easier it will be for the user to take the survey with not a lot of time, and the easier it will be to analyze the data. We have looked at other options. So MDE programmed the survey, and then we looked at the way that worked. It would have been onerous, I think, for both the user and then whoever's analyzing the data at the back end. So MDE reached out to CCSSO. They have SurveyMonkey as their client, which does have more sophistication, but maybe not total sophistication. And that's where we have gotten stuck in the last week, is trying to find someone who has access to Qualtrics, or figuring out how much it would be to purchase Qualtrics, which is a very sophisticated survey client that a lot of universities use in order to make the survey as easy as possible to administer and to take and to analyze. So that's kind of where we're stuck. But as soon as we can get that resolved, we will be sending this first part of the survey out to anyone. So that means that if you have last minute Hail Mary changes that you would like to make to the survey, there are still a little bit of time, but not very much time to try, because as soon as we can get the survey client issue resolved, we're going to program the survey and have the survey sent out, because we need to give people 4 weeks to be able to respond. And we want to, hopefully we can have some information and report back to you at the September meeting if we're able to get this out very quickly after this meeting. So that's why I'm saying there's not a whole lot of time. The other thing that the survey task force did at that first meeting was go through feedback that was sent to the task force before the meeting in very great detail, and incorporate those changes where we could, streamline the questions where we could, and also make some clarifications. So that's actually what this second document is, that's called survey preparation. The reason the second document is long is because it has a lot of tables in the back, copies of tables that will allow someone in a district to basically see what all the questions are going to be and what the answer choices are going to be, so that they can go ahead and make notes of how they would fill out the survey as they're gathering information, so that when they're ready to submit the survey, they just need to go in and boom, 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 they can answer questions. It won't take them, they won't have to sit in front of the computer for hours trying to do it, because they will already have something to reference as they fill it out. This document was provided to the task force in PDF, but it's actually a Word document, and these forms in the back of it are fillable forms. So if you just look to on a page of the form, you'll see that there are several of the items that say choose an item. And if you were actually looking at a soft copy Word version, that would be a drop-down box, and you could just pick the answer. And then the other ones that are other ones are check boxes. Some of these questions, depending on the answers that you give the survey, you would actually be able to skip the question within the actual survey interface. And that would shorten the survey for you. So that's primarily why this document is so long. But the other thing that's different in the preparation document is that there is a list of terms as well as a list of questions and answers to try to provide clarity to whoever is filling out the document. So that was one of the things that we had lots of round and round about, how we should define certain words so that when people were filling out the survey, they understood what the question was really asking them. And so a draft of this was presented to the survey subcommittee. They had feedback. It was updated before the meeting. People had more feedback during the meeting. It was updated after the meeting. And then Christy and I went back and forth on this document as well. So at this point in time, if you're actually filling out the survey, any question that you might have should be answered in the preparation document, including questions around, things like, what are examples of district tests that should be included in the survey? And then there's a list of types of tests that should be included. And just different clarifications on ways to answer the question. This document is going to go out in an email with the survey so that people can reference this document as they're filling out the survey, rather than having to try to click around within the survey to try to find the answers, so that they can have it on their desk to make it as easy as possible. If there are any updates to this document, there is still time to make those updates to this document as well. But again, as soon as possible, because we're going to try to get it out. We want to get all these things out together. So that's the first survey. The other two that we talked about at the meeting were part 2, which is about district and state testing practices, and part 3, which is about technology. Now, the survey subcommittee, their recommendation was that we sent out part 1, which is about district tests, and part 3, which is about technology, at the same time, with the understanding that the technology survey would be filled out with a very different person than the testing survey. The testing survey would be filled out by somebody like a deputy superintendent or a curriculum coordinator or testing coordinator or something like that, whereas the technology survey would be filled out by a technology coordinator, whoever does that for the district. The recommendation for that survey was also to make that survey as clear as possible in terms of multiple choice answers, etc. I am still in the process of trying to make that survey multiple choice, and it will be a lot shorter because all of the technology related questions will be around issues that either the main committee or the subcommittee thought were relevant to testing. So for example, not asking questions like what are your technology policies about any random thing, but things like how many test capable devices do you have? Not how many devices do you have, how many test capable devices you have, because there are school districts that have computers that they can't use for testing. So it's not very useful to ask them to go count all their computers if they're not useful for testing. Other issues like whether or not, even if they have enough devices, maybe they don't have the bandwidth. And so they couldn't even use all the devices at the same time if they don't have the bandwidth, and everybody can't be on the internet at the same time taking a test. So that technology survey, which a copy was given to the survey subcommittee when we talked about it in June, that is what I'm working on right now. I hoped that I would have it done for today's meeting, but I haven't yet had an opportunity to send it to Christy so that we could go back and forth and make sure that the questions were clear. I can send that out after this meeting if people want to look at it. And I also plan to send it to a couple of you who have technology coordinators in your districts to ask your technology coordinator to preview it to see if they might have, because I don't think we have any technology coordinators on the committee, right? And I think it might be useful to have somebody who's a technology coordinator in the district look at it, because since that's the audience, I think we need to have feedback from that type of person to make sure that we're asking questions in the way that they would understand them, and things that they think are valuable. So that survey will go out either at the same time part one goes out or shortly thereafter. And then we will work on the testing practices version of the survey. Now that is about things like not the tests that you're taking, but the process of testing in your district. Things like, do you shut the whole school down for progress monitoring testing? And everybody's sitting in the classroom waiting on progress monitoring testing to be over. Do you stop teaching content after the third 9 weeks in order to do test prep until the testing window begins for state testing? Those types of questions are what that second part is about. And the survey subcommittee's recommendation was that go out after part one is complete, because they think there will be overlap in the people who have the answers to those questions. They don't want them to have to worry about taking 2 surveys at the same time, and because we want to be respectful of people's time, because we know that this is a lot to ask. But all of the questions that people raised at the first meeting, the only way to get those answers is to do a survey. There's really no other data source for that. So that is all my update from the survey subcommittee, but there were other people who were there. So if anybody who's on the subcommittee that wants to bring up anything that we talked about that I did not mention, or has any other clarification they'd like to give for the benefit of the whole committee.
I was not on the subcommittee, but I have a couple of questions, and I'll address those to the entire committee. So one of the questions I have is that it appears that the survey will go to, and correct me if I'm wrong, one person who will typically be probably the district test coordinator for part one, or that individual. So when I look at questions, and I'm going to give you some specifics, 19, 20, and 21, I think we're asking that individual to make assumptions about their own work. And I have some concerns about that. Specifically around 20 and 21, I'm not exactly sure how that answer would be no. Perhaps, but I'm not exactly sure. And so I guess for me, I walked into this meeting hoping that we would be able to get at a very organic level whether or not teachers not necessarily are expected to use results, because I think that should be, a yes. But exactly how are they using the results? And the same thing with number 21 with administrators. And so is there a subsequent study that the survey committee actually expects to delve down into those questions? Because to me, that's really the root of the issue here, is not necessarily the assessment, but how are we using the results of the assessment to make instruction stronger?
Yeah, so the questions around anything related to data analysis, how data is used, and what the practice for reviewing data is, that's part 2.
That's part 2.
That's
okay.
part 2,
And we
which
just
is
don't
not
have
in this
that one yet.
document.
I understand.
Right.
Okay.
So we also we actually talked at the survey subcommittee about these series of questions. So let me give you a little context about what we talked about. So 19 we're on page 6 of the document in case people want to know where we are. 19 is about the from the district's perspective, why is the district requiring students and teachers to give this test? Okay, and those are the answer choices that I came up with with some consultation.
How does that get to the issue that we saw in your organization's report of districts that are using multiple assessments for the same purpose? How do we dig down into that
So
data?
the way that the survey works is that for each test, you're going to answer these questions.
Okay.
So that means that if you answer that, okay, I'm taking iReady to enable teachers to make instructional decisions. I'm also taking Star Reading to enable teachers to make instructional decisions. And on top of that, I've decided to take Dibbles to allow teachers to make instructional decisions.
So when
it'll
they
show up in
answer
the data.
8, they actually get all of those
That's right.
questions for that. Okay,
That's
I
right.
understand.
That's right. So the issue around question 20 is that in our research, we found districts that were administering assessments that were not providing the data to the teachers, and the administrators were the only ones seeing the data, which I know sounds strange.
No, I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding. So when you say they're not providing the data, you mean the data actually wasn't being presented to the teachers, or the data was just missing elements?
The data was never given to the teachers. They were never given access to the data.
Okay.
They were administering an assessment, and the principals or the district was keeping the data. I don't know what they were doing with the data, but they were keeping the data, but they were never providing it to the teachers.
Okay, so that's the impetus of question 20.
That's right.
All right, I understand.
So it might beg the question, why are you giving an assessment that you're not letting your teachers see the data for? You can imagine how frustrating that might be if you were a teacher. So that's why it asks that yes or no question. Hopefully 99% of districts are going to say yes. If we give an assessment, we let teachers see the assessment. But if we don't, that's possible. Okay. I think the other conversation we had was around the fact that these specific questions are questions that you will only know the answers to if you actually talk to teachers or administrators as users. So, if you're a district administrator, you could assume that teachers find it helpful, but you might not know. So one of the things that the task force talked about was whether or not we should pull out specific questions and just give those questions, very few questions, directly to teachers. And then we went back and forth about, well, do we want to have both perspectives for particular questions? Do we want to have both an administrative perspective and a teacher perspective to see if they were different?
Especially around the utility.
Around the utility, yes, specifically. And these
Right.
were the questions that prompted that discussion. And people said they did want a mini survey for teachers, directly for teachers.
Okay.
I think the issue that we're going to run into with that is to try to figure out how to do that and get a reasonable response rate, because there's something like 36,000 teachers in Mississippi. And, if we administer a survey and we only get 20% of teachers to respond, and we don't get a high enough percentage in every district to have valid results by district, then the utility of that is going to be kind of funky. So that's something I think we need to talk through a little bit more about, if we were to do a teacher survey, how we would structure that in terms of the survey sample to make sure that we got valid results, because there's no point in asking people to fill out a survey if we know ahead of time we're not going to get valid results. It's just an exercise in futility for everybody. So yes, that was something that we talked about, and we kind of were more focused on this than focused on that teacher survey, but it did get brought. It was discussed.
Thank you.
Yes. it's going to go out at the same time that the survey goes out so that they can do the preparation and then when they're ready, fill out the survey. We could do that, but we had blocked out 4 weeks for the whole survey, and so they could fill it out, you know, when they had time immediately. If people think it's a better idea to send out the preparation 2 weeks in advance and then do the 4-week block for the survey, we could do it that way, but it would just be 6 weeks for the whole experience.
Just a suggestion, I would hope that when we send this out, we don't, except for the technology one, I think you do probably need to specify maybe the technology coordinator, but for a district, I don't think we need to specify who fills this out. It needs to come back from the district, because there might be a team of people at that district that need to get together, superintendents, assistant superintendents, you know, some principals, whatever, to give a true picture from that district. And if you specify a person, then you might have one person fill it out and you're not getting a true picture from that district.
So you're saying send it to the superintendent as opposed to sending it to the DTC?
I would say send it to the superintendent, that, you know, with directions that this needs to be done by a committee of people in your district to get us a true picture of what's going on in that district.
And in the on the first page of the preparation, it does say in this under Part 1 District Testing Inventory, in that second paragraph, it says this part of the survey will require the respondent to know detailed information about every test and every grade that all students in a core academic subject took. District administrators should consult school-based administrators and teachers to ensure no test has been admitted. District-based administrators and teachers are better positioned to answer some of the questions. So that will be, we should highlight that, is basically what you're saying.
So your target date for dissemination is September?
Well, what is Friday of this week?
The 1st.
The 1st. Either by next Friday at the latest. I hope that we have the survey client issue resolved.
Okay.
Because I actually don't think it'll take that long to program the actual survey. We just have to have the software to do it, and then we can get it done and get it out.
I was just thinking we need to back the next task force meeting up to whenever you get the results back, because I think the next one is like September 19th or something. Okay.
Yeah. I think we should wait to have the results of the first survey and the technology survey, because people didn't think that we needed quite as long for the technology survey, because it will be shorter, but they wanted to do them at the same time, and hopefully we can have the results from both of those surveys at the next meeting.
Is there a possibility of actually having a survey go out to students?
I think it's up to the task force. We just have to figure out what the questions would be.
Look like.
Mm-hmm.
I have some input on that. I think a survey to students would be a really good idea, because I know, especially here at Meridian High, all the state tests, students here have had a really hard time understanding the questions. So I think getting some feedback from us would help us to know how to word the questions in a way that makes it a better sense of what we know.
So for the students that are on the task force, I think what would be helpful is if you could come up with a bullet pointed list or a list of questions that you think that students need to answer, that specifically we need the student perspective for. Whether that means you go through this part of the survey and try to figure out, you know, are there any questions specifically you think students should answer, or if there are just other questions that you think we need student perspective on. And I think that with students as well, we need to think through sampling, because we have lots and lots of students. Are we going to do only high school students? Are we going to do, you know, who are we going to do, so that we get a representative sample and get some valid information back?
That necessitates I mean, it's only fair. The teachers are the ones that have voiced a lot of the concerns, and they have to be involved in this process. So I would strongly encourage us to take the time to take the steps necessary to have their voice heard.
I think that both for the students and the teachers, the work is just what are the questions and how do we do the sample. And for that, you know, I think if there needs to be another subcommittee meeting about that, then we can talk about having that. I'm not, if we're going to do, if the survey, the student survey and the teacher survey are going to be invented out of whole cloth, I'm probably going to need a lot more help because this has taken a considerable amount of work just with the 3 main parts.
Is there any value in maybe doing the students and the teachers differently? Focus groups around the state. I mean, is there, and I understand that that's not necessarily always a clean, very clean data point, but is there any value in actually having it more qualitative as opposed to quantitative?
I think that's a question for the committee.
Yeah, okay. Hi. Is there any value? I mean, what would you all think about that? I mean, we're kind of dispersed as a task force. Is there a way for us to do that in a more qualitative way and send those notes? And I understand that qualitative research is not always it's like the loudest voice in the room, and I'm aware of that. But I'm very concerned about making sure that students have an opportunity to respond since they're our clients, and how we give them the opportunity to respond. And I think Kelly is right just in terms of teachers. I just want to make sure that it's not something that's skewed and that it's really of a value. And I understand you're concerned about the response rate. I get that. I think we need to think about how do we capture data so that it's meaningful and it really provides good recommendations to the state board or even to the legislature. And it's not sound bites, because I don't think any of us want that.
Christy, do you want to jump in about this question, either the sampling question or the data collection method?
Not at this time. Excuse me, this is Laura Evans in Greenwood, and I wasn't sure if we moved forward on something for the students. Could a couple of questions be added for the parents' perspective, those that are, heavily involved in, their children's process and progress as they, while taking or preparing for tests?
I mean, I think it's just a question of how and what, and do we have the manpower?
Okay, that's just something I was thinking about, because when I talk to parents, all of them are saying this session, but not every parent knows or is that involved in their children's day-to-day and tests and that kind of thing. So I don't know if there's any way to just get some open-ended questions or some people's opinions about things as well, just to have some input from that perspective.
One approach could be a series of regional meetings. MDE tends to do those very well in certain parts of our state, so it could be that we could partner with some of the recess or regional service centers to host meetings and have discussions where parents are at the table, students, educators. So that may be another means of collecting voice versus just the numbers.
I think in a twofold mechanism, it could also be a part of training. Because what we continue to hear is that individuals make assumptions about student assessments that are not always grounded in the truth. So even if we do it as a regional or whatever that looks like, I think it could also answer one of the questions that we had initially around making sure that individuals understand those essential standards when it comes to teaching, but also understanding what assessment is used for what purpose. So I could kind of see it as serving a dual purpose. I know that moves us away from a pretty static survey, and I get that, but I also think there's a way to do it that's not necessarily all survey based, but it will take more time and of course more manpower.
Our goal is,
And I don't, I'm helping out this Laura Evans however I can in that.
the overall goal is to make this an authentic process. So if we're really looking at getting a collective voice, being able to have those live meetings, I think will be an opportunity to really give voice to this purpose of finding out what is the true sense of assessment and how can we change it and improve it in our state.
But I also think, though, if we're talking about moving to training and those things, we need to have some data. We need to have something to drive that. And so this first part of the survey, this part one, is so vital to get that starting point, because you don't want to start having regional meetings and there's no direction for those regional meetings.
I agree.
So you want to have some data collected so that that drives what you're going to do for those focus meetings with parents, with students, with whoever. And I fully agree that we need to get as many voices to the table as possible from all the stakeholders, but you've got to have a starting point somewhere to drive that discussion.
Right. All of them can't go on at the same time. I understand that. I agree.
And it could be just like we were going to stagger the parts of the survey. It could be we want to stagger this, that, you know, after we get the district perspective, essentially with the district survey, it will give us more clarity around what the question should be to students and should be to teachers and should be to parents. The issue with sampling around, like if we do surveys for these other stakeholders, somebody has to construct a scientifically valid sample. Even if we do focus groups, if we want that data to be representative, it needs to be, somebody's going to have to construct a scientifically valid sample, and we're going to have to figure out how to get people to focus groups, who's going to facilitate the focus groups, you know, unless we just want a lot of voice without, you know.
No, it has to be structured.
We need to be able to say, if we're going to ask people to come to meetings, we should be able to say these responses were representative of, you know, of teachers, as opposed to we selected these 5 teachers and they told us what they thought. It may or may not be representative. Because if we're going to do the exercise, I think we should do it right so that we can be confident about the results. But that it's just going to take some time, capacity, potentially funding to do those things, because I'm not sure what resources we have at our fingertips to do things like focus groups, or, you know, hopefully somebody at MDE could help us constructing a scientifically valid sample. I'm not sure. I know that they've done parent surveys via parent telephone surveys that have been scientifically valid using the call center at Mississippi State. I know that MDE's done that in the past.
Is this an opportunity to partner with IHL? They certainly have a stake in this, especially with schools of ed. So,
I mean, and that's conversations that we probably need to have with somebody at IHL. We don't have anybody from IHL on this task force.
We don't. Invite Rob.
So that's one of the.
That's what we're taking on that.
That's one of the avenues that I have asked about. I haven't talked to Patrice as of today to see if she got any responses from anybody at any of the IHLs around if they have survey platform we can use. I know for a fact that at least one of the universities here in Mississippi uses Qualtrics, but I don't know what their license is like, whether or not we can, you know, send out the survey that way. So it will probably, from my research, it will probably cost around $1,500 to get Qualtrics for a year-long period to do multiple sophisticated surveys, which doesn't sound like a huge amount of money, but it, you know, it's still money, and this task force doesn't have any money as far as I know. So being able to find somebody who has the platform would be better than having to go beg somebody for money to purchase it. Yeah. Do you, Senator Tolleson, do you want to add a line item? $5,000 for the task force.
How did you find Qualtrics? I mean, is that?
So.
I don't think that's the best platform at this point.
So there's something called question looping, which basically enables you to, by your responses, you can go back to, you can answer the same series of questions about multiple different things. Qualtrics allows you to do something called question blocking. So basically you would have a list of the tests, and you would say, I take all these tests. And then the survey would automatically be programmed to ask you the same series of questions about each test without you having to go back and say, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one. With less sophisticated survey software, you would have to basically, it would just be a lot more long and onerous rather than it being seamless from the user perspective. And then on the back end, the way the data would be reported would require a lot of formatting, which would require more time and effort. And if we're thinking about 144 school districts and everybody has 6 different testing products they use, you know, it makes the variables for error a lot, and time, but also error in the results a lot more. SurveyMonkey does question skipping, where it's fancy enough to say, well, if you answered this way, go to this question, but it does not appear to be advanced enough to do really sophisticated question blocking or looping, which is why Qualtrics does that, which is why, if somebody knows of a different survey client that does that they have access to, we would use a different one. But that's the one that I know of that does that.
Feedback to expanding this to teachers, I think for it to be truly valid information, let me say, I think if you ask any county office person, are we getting data to teachers, they say yes. If you ask a teacher, you may get a whole different answer. And so the validity of that is going to be really important. Dr. Coleman's point about making sure it drives instruction, which is the whole, that's what we're after to start with. I don't think we can get that information unless it comes from a teacher if it is or how it's driving instruction. So I certainly would be for expanding it at least to teachers. And I know you said that's in part 2 to some degree. Is that included in part 2, so the true measures of how it is driving instruction?
Yeah, so part 2, which the subcommittee looked at before and which we didn't bring to this meeting, asked questions around things like, what is your data analysis process? Is it one-on-one coaching with teachers? Is it everybody gets in the library and you look at some slides and that's it? Those kinds of questions are part 2. And a lot of, when we had the discussion about the mini survey to teachers, a lot of the questions that people thought needed to be posed to teachers were in that second part, more so than this first part. There was really just the question about, is it useful, that people thought teachers needed to have from this first part. It was really more that second part that people thought teachers needed to weigh in on the questions of how the data was used and what the impacts were on instructional time for having a certain testing process versus a different testing process, which is also what is part of that part 2. So I think that, and again, with that survey, people also wanted it to be more multiple choice rather than narrative answers. So that is taking a considerable amount of time to try to think through what should those multiple choices be. That's why it takes time, because you have to try to figure out what people might answer and then come up with the answers and try to make it as comprehensive as possible. So hopefully we will have something to circulate for people on that one in the next couple of weeks. But I've been focused on this one and the technology one because that's what people thought needed to go out first. But yes, I agree. I think we could, and this is why the survey subcommittee had this discussion around, it may be useful to have both the perspective of the district and the perspective of teachers on the same questions, because we could get very different answers. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, certainly. Certainly. Mhm. 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 Right. Right. And
First, make sure the sample is correct. Like you'll get two different answers from teachers. You send it to tested teachers, you'll get one answer. You send it to non-tested teachers, you'll get a totally different answer about how it's driving instruction.
yeah. Right. Right. A lot of variables. Yeah. Right. Are going to have different. Yeah. So in that sense, formulating the questions properly, getting the right demographic information about teachers. So fourth grade art teacher is going to have a different perspective than a fourth grade reading teacher, and then having a valid sample so that we know we're sampling enough of the right people that we have a valid response. That could get very complicated. Sampling is very hard. And so, that's something that we need to ask. And I understand that MDE has all folks in MSIS, but that MSIS is a bit difficult to work with around teachers and sampling sometimes. So that's a conversation that we're going to have to try to figure out and have. I'd rather do a smaller, scientifically valid sample than send it out to 36,000 people and not get good response rate and good valid answers. Because it would be very powerful to say in a representative survey, teachers felt this way.
Question on the grade 6 through 8 questionnaire under page 11 of 23. And I know this is not many districts, but for those that still teach algebra in 8th grade. So are we capturing that course under math because it's specified in the high school assessment?
Yes. And so we can update that to either be to have Algebra 1 as a separate question. Okay. The other thing that I was going to ask is that I kind of went around and asked people what products our district's using, and that's how we came up with the list of questions. But it's certainly not exhaustive, which is why, we need to have an other. But if there are things that people are eyeballing it and saying, you left out so-and-so testing product, and I know that so-and-so district uses so-and-so testing product, it should be on this list somewhere.
When we get the results back, will we be able to, I feel sure we would, be able to isolate the results geographically from the state?
Yeah, so there's going to be contact information as part of every survey, so we know what district is responding, and then we should be able to say, okay, everybody that's in, congressional district 3 said this, or however, or the RISA, the RISA that is this RISA, the Gulf Coast RISA said this, or things like A-rated districts said this versus, D-rated districts said this. We will be able to, now that will take some time because we'll have to pull that from the data, but we will have the information to be able to do that, because that was one of the questions people asked. What's the difference between what A-rated districts are doing and what DNF-rated districts are doing? And so we need to be able to, get information that will answer those.
That will be very powerful.
So that's going to come through, because I thought that was coming through part 2. But that will, you can extrapolate some of that from part 1 too.
Well, from part 1, we'll be able to say things like, A-rated districts are much more likely to use this assessment than D-rated districts, or say things like A-rated districts use fewer assessments, D-rated districts use more assessments, whatever it is, those kinds of things. Frequency, time, who they administer tests to, who they're testing, things like that we'll be able to know, even if we won't be able to know things like, what does your test prep look like from part 1? That will be part 2.
Vendors will love this.
Vendors might love it, but it's not really for vendors.
Straight to the list.
Right. But, school districts might love it too, because there are probably school districts who want to know, well, what are all the A-rated districts using? And right now, unless you called everybody on the phone, there's no way to figure that out. No way. It could lead to some interesting professional development opportunities, probably. Okay. Did everybody get this? And Patrice sent out soft copies of this. She sent out the PDF. Did everybody get that? Okay. So even if you want to throw paper away, you should have it in your email, so you should be able to provide feedback. And like I said, we're going to try to get it out as soon as possible. So I'm going to ask, if at all possible, that if you have any further feedback that you think must be included in the survey before it goes out, try to get it to me by Friday, so that if I can get the client issue resolved, we can try to get the survey out next week, so that we can give people enough time. Because I do think it's going to yield some very interesting things. And you should, like I said, in this first document that's the actual questions with the actual answers, go through the answer choices and tell me if you think there was an answer choice that I didn't think of, and that when we went back and forth we didn't think of as a committee, that needs to be included, because somebody's going to want to answer that way.
When the survey goes out, and this is an MDE question, I know that Dr. Wright was not able to be with us today, but I mean, can we get, I know she's behind this, can we get her weight as far as when this goes out, something sent to superintendents to say, because we get thousands of things, and if we don't have something that says, hey, this is really important to complete, sometimes there'll be many of us, myself included, sometimes that don't look at those things like we should. And so if we have, a cover letter or something that says this is vitally important to be completed, and the timeline from, to make sure that the attention is brought to it. Not that you don't count, Dr. Vanderbilt, but sure.
And I think people on the survey telling folks that they know the reason behind why we're doing this, it's not a gotcha game. It's to try to figure out if we can make this better. Because especially if we start to find some very serious trends among districts, like districts are all engaging in the same practices, then that could be very helpful in terms of how MDE spends its resources, how RESAs spend their resources, how the teacher professional organizations or the superintendents association spend their resources to provide support, especially if they know, hey, 85% of our districts are doing this thing, we need to help them. You don't know what you don't know. Right. And we shouldn't make assumptions. And I think a lot of our conversation right now is based on assumptions that may or may not be valid.
I'd just like to just reiterate that point. It will be important to make sure that superintendents understand the purpose here, because there are situations where because of not the unsurety of how it's going to be used with their names attached to it, that they'll potentially get together and discuss what answers, how we should respond to this across districts and those kinds of things. So it'll really be important to let them know that that there's a purpose here, and it's necessary that that you're doing this based on your district, and there are going to be no negative consequences or things like that. That's punitive. Yes, absolutely.
Right. Because the more valid it can be, the more likely we'll be able to find something that will actually be helpful to districts for them to know.
When do you want us to get what questions you think we should come back?
So I think for the student questions, when you go through this and start coming up with that, I would say probably by the next task force meeting, if we can start to have a sense of what that might start to look like, especially because we are hopefully at the next task force meeting, we'll be able to talk about part 2 of the survey. And part 2 of the survey is going to really have a bearing on what might go in a teacher survey as well. So anything that people want to talk about in relation to that, I'll send out part 2 as it stands now, so you can kind of get a sense of what was on that. Just be aware that it's kind of mid-update, because there's still a lot of narrative questions in that one that I'm still struggling with trying to word correctly. and it will need to go through a lot of edits before it's ready for prime time. If you email things ahead of time to me, then that gives me the opportunity to go ahead and incorporate things. And then anything that might need further discussion, we can be more focused in the way we use our time, so we don't have to discuss things that we can just go ahead and do. So if you want to email me before, are we going to move the
Yeah,
September meeting?
that's what I was just looking at. So the next date was the 12th, but it looks like the survey won't go out until the week of the 3rd. And if we give ourselves 4 weeks from that means the first week of October. So how does October, you think analysis can be done by the 2nd, or is that too soon?
Depends on how in-depth you want the analysis. The results will be ready.
Let's look at the next way. I feel confident people will want them very detailed. I know this is like herding cats. I'm open for suggestions.
What was the planned October meeting date, MDE?
I don't think there was
It had
one.
not. Okay.
There wasn't one past the September one.
Are there big conferences in October that a bunch of people go to? Don't go to conferences.
ASA is at the end of. ASA is at the October 28th through the 30th.
Okay, so that's the very last week. But if we put it like at the middle week of October.
What about October 16th?
I'll have to move my dental appointment, but I will do that for you. I will do that for you.
You could always move it up. This one is a Tuesday, but I mean, only because I was looking at the September meeting was a Tuesday. So, what is the task force pleasure? Tuesday, the 16th. Priest, may we have the room? Okay. Okay, well,
10 o'clock,
please,
so
for those
people
of
can
us that
drive.
have to drive 3 hours, we appreciate it. So October 16th. And Rachel, you think we can expect something in advance to read before we'll get here, so we'll be able to formulate questions about the analysis and see where there's a need to probe deeper?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other work of the task force, questions, concerns, things that we need to bring to the table? Hearing none, I suppose we will adjourn. Thank you all so much for being here.